Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Tim Rasinski. Dr. Tim Rasinski is a professor of literacy education at Kent State University and director of its award-winning reading clinic. Tim has written over 250 articles and has authored, co-authored, or edited over 50 books or curriculum programs on reading education. He is author of the best-selling books on reading fluency, The Fluent Reader, and the mega book of Fluency. And if anyone would like to read his full bio, we will attach it along with his Twitter handle. So welcome, Dr. Rasinski. I'm going to call you Tim from here on in, all right? And I'm just going to give a little bit of background to start. There was the Sold a Story podcast that Emily Hanford came out with recently, and it caused a Twitter storm, right? A lot of comments about it. And in response to Hanford's podcast, there was a letter that came out. So we're going to get right into this. There was a letter that came out that was signed by 58 reading experts, and your name was on this letter. I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the points from the letter. And it said that Sold a Story fans divisiveness, creating a false sense that there is a war going on between those who believe in phonics and those who do not. I'm just reading the exact words. Whether you feel that way or not, you'll have a chance to respond. But I am just pulling out the words from here. It said that Sold a Story takes the position. It's a podcast that takes the fabricated phonics debate a step further. To imply that other approaches are not just wrong, but money-making schemes is reckless. It said that it's biased storytelling and finger-pointing. And we, meaning anyone who signed this letter, we are asking for the rest of the story, the research that is being ignored. And we are asking that those who truly care about doing the real work come together and move forward in a productive way that recognizes all the elements of effective reading instruction. So I just pulled out bits and pieces of some wording that really stuck with me when I read it. And I could see why people were angry when reading this letter. And I could also see that there were many people surprised when they saw your signature on this, along with people such as Lucy Calkins and Dick Allington. There were other names. I'm not going to get into all the names, but I think it would be a great way to start off by asking you about your position, why you chose to sign this, and if in some ways you might regret signing this letter.
Oh, good question. If you would have asked me when I first signed a letter and it went public, if I regretted, I regretted the response I got. I regretted being called names and told I'm responsible for sending children to jail. That was, something that was beyond the pale for me. But I don't regret saying the rest of the story needs to be told. I think Sold a Story tells a story, a limited story about how kids struggle in reading and what we need to do to help them. But it's not the complete story. And I think by not even addressing the rest of the story in my particular area, reading fluency, I think what we're doing is we're giving license to teachers to refrain from getting into reading fluency instruction. And as a result, many children are going to suffer. My area has been reading fluency for 40 years, and I wish a podcast such as Sold a Story could be focused on reading fluency. because in the 40 plus years that I've been working in this area, I haven't gotten very many people interested, nor have other people who have worked on reading fluency. So, in a sense, it was my attempt to perhaps shine a little bit more light on why reading fluency is essential. Not diminishing the importance of phonics, but you need both. In fact, you need more than just phonics and fluency, but certainly fluency is a key. So that was my primary reason for putting my name on that paper. There were other thoughts that went through my head as well, but the focus primarily is on making a comprehensive story about reading instruction, especially for kids who struggle.
But do you think, and I'm going to turn it over to Judy soon, but do you think perhaps the language in the letter caused maybe more divisiveness?
I think that yes, I would agree. I think some of the language could have been more thoughtful, more sensitive. So I do regret that. At the same time, though, the responses that I've received from the parent letter were quite emotional as well, and contributed to the divisiveness that you mentioned, Faith.
Okay, and we're going to discuss the parent letter soon. So Judy, what are your thoughts about this letter, Tim's response, or anything you might want to add to that?
So first of all, Tim, I want to say that I'm really sorry that, people were unkind on social media. That is not okay. That could turn into bullying. I don't care how old the person bullying is or how old you are. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. And I think that this podcast is a little different than many others. We're a very solution-based podcast that likes to talk about those tough topics, but also, think and shift the needle to help kids. And I think that something that you said really resonates with me. You mentioned the word solutions, and I think solutions are really important. And focusing on one pillar of instruction, as we know, I've been in the field for a very long time as well, formerly trained in reading recovery, and now shifted very much so into the science of reading as well for the last 6 years. It's going to take more than one pillar in order for our kids to be successful. And fluency is a key component to make sure that kids understand what they read. I think the problem, however, has been in education that the first course of action for kids wasn't to decode the word and slide through the word at point of difficulty and use what they know. We were doing too many other things. Yes, of course, we always want kids to integrate meaning at the end. Of course, that's always the goal. However, telling kids a whole bunch of different things, does this make sense? Does it look right? The first course of action, in my professional opinion, I've shifted 100%, is looking at the word and applying what you know at point of difficulty. Now, does that mean that I threw everything from the past out? I certainly did not. There were wonderful things like repeating phrases and learning that oral language and so forth. However, we got to be honest, looking at like level A books, I'm really not that happy with a lot of them. Yes, they help with one-to-one correspondence, but in terms of like reading, why are kids looking at words that are complex in a level A book, especially ENL kids? I was working with kids, they can't decode a word like climb, and they shouldn't have to in the beginning stages.
The native speakers can't do that.
Right.
I mean, they haven't been taught to read yet.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it was easier in the higher levels to work on phrasing and fluency because it was more of that authentic language. But, we have to also push ourselves with the lower levels. I'm having kids working on books with a lot of CVC words, and, it's a little bit hard on the brain, However, you can still go back and have them reread it and sound more phrased and fluent.
Sure. Here's my point on this, Judy, is do we have to limit kids to texts that are, engineered, if you will, to only have certain kinds of words within them? In our own work, yes, we do some of that, but we also bring in rich poetry for kids to read. The thing about poetry is, and for that matter, song lyrics. I do a lot with song lyrics. Kids, these are kinds of texts that you want to reread and eventually perform orally with prosody. And we get to the point where kids actually memorize the text. Now, people say, they actually argue with me, that's not reading. Kids got the text memorized. You're absolutely right. But then what we do is we go in and we examine the words within the text. Let's learn the text first. A joyful, rich poem, get the meaning out of it, and then let's focus on the individual words and figure out how those words are broken, can be decoded. I think we need to go bottom up and top down at the same time. There's no one way to do this. And again, the messages that we seem to be getting, and not just Emily's work, but the New York Times article and such, is that, it's only, this synthetic phonics approach that is the way to teach kids to read. Yes, it is, but it's not all there is to it.
Kim, can I tell you something?
Wait, you know what? I just wanted to.
No, you can't tell me something.
I just want to jump in and say
Faith,
something.
I just want to say one thing. I'm petrified to sign a letter. I'm not signing anything. Not today, not tomorrow. If I
Yes,
not signing anything.
that's the takeaway from this.
I
Don't
know.
sign any letters.
You got it.
All right.
But hey, what the upside of it is, people have been talking to me about reading fluency more than I've had in my entire career.
Bingo.
Why did you sign that letter, Dole?
That's right. So the point is that, what is it? Negative publicity is actually better than no publicity, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
exactly. But I will take your advice, and I'll be careful about what I sign in the future.
So, talking about poetry, I love poetry. I love sharing poetry with children. And certainly, the rhythm of a poem could be very helpful. And then examining the poem and looking for some of those repeated sounds that come up. Nothing wrong with that. I think, however, that the word balance, and I've said this before, the word balance is not balanced anymore. It's a word that is charged. It's a word that kind of implies that we are taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that and leaving it up to the teacher to figure out how much to do and how to blend it together. And what's happening is, and I've been also in the schools for a very long time, I was with Reading First, Tim. So this goes back to things we talked about in terms of, scientifically based reading research. What happened really is we talked about the importance of phonics, but like you said, how did we execute it? Not very well. And so we might think that phonics has gotten a lot of attention and fluency was pushed to the side, but I do think that the phonics that I've seen was still a smattering of phonics, not really enough systematic, structured, explicit, all the things that you said that the units of study did not have, right? You were one of the people who examined the Lucy Calkins units of study, and you found it to be not really acceptable in terms of being a first line teaching approach for kids, because it wasn't explicit enough. I would say that even during the Reading First times, that even when we were trying to get this into schools, that we didn't really get the structure of phonics in, and everything goes back to, if you can't lift the words up off the page, you can't do much of anything else. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I got a lot of thoughts. I need to try to get them in order here. First of all, in defense of Lucy, he has been responsive to trying to improve her program. I know that, and I think even Emily mentioned this, she has worked to try to improve the phonics approach. I've had a number of conversations with her about how to make fluency a more integral part of her program. So, that is, although, it was a concern, you got to give her credit for, trying to continually improve the program. She's not an evil person. And it almost came across in my listening to the podcast that seemed to be the case, that she was all out for the money. And that's certainly not the case at all. As far as systematic phonics, actually, I agree with you. I think that phonics needs to be taught in a relatively direct, systematic, and I might even say intensive sort of way. However, the research really isn't all that conclusive on that. In the United Kingdom, they've been using synthetic phonics for a number of years now, and they haven't really seen the kind of improvements that they had expected. Here's an article that just came out last year in The Guardian saying, focus on phonics to teach reading is failing children, says a landmark study. So, you know, what's going on here? Again, it's got to be more than just phonics here. I have an article that is with some colleagues from the UK. I have a hard time pronouncing the name. It's called the Hertfordshire Fluency Project. And they have been working with kids, 7 to 11-year-olds. I guess they call it Key Stage 2, on fluency. And these are many children who are at risk. And what they have found is that, and they've had over 1,200 kids in this study, working on fluency for as little as 2-3 months results in over a year's progress, not only in word decoding, but also in reading comprehension. We're helping kids cross that bridge from phonics. Maybe they have the phonics from the systematic phonics that's being provided in England, but it's not enough to get them across that bridge. So I'm going back again to that same topic of mine. One other thing I'm going to mention before I forget, reading first. I'm glad you mentioned reading first.
Yeah.
Because we had such high hopes for this program. You know, if you're a reading first school, you have to, commit yourself to teaching those 5 pillars. They did a study of reading fluency, and part of the, what they found was things didn't turn out the way they had hoped. And so they took observers going into both reading first and non-reading first classrooms. And what they found was that less than 5 minutes per day was devoted to reading fluency. I can't help but wonder, perhaps that's the reason. Tim Shanahan suggests that 30 to 45 minutes per day from grade 1 on should be devoted to reading fluency. What kind of traction are you going to get when it's only 5 minutes or even less than that?
Bingo.
So, okay, go ahead, Judy. I'm blabbing too much.
So I'm definitely with you on that. And I think that's why, like in the last few episodes, I've been saying we have to focus on the entire literacy block and what that should look like. I think a lot of teachers in the field are questioning things more, thinking about things more, but there's still a lot of confusion because there were some things we were doing that we feel may have been aligned to the science. And now we're like, should we do it? Should we not do it? And I listed some important ones: shared reading, echo reading, choral reading, familiar reading, repeated readings. I see that all of those things have great value because phonics in isolation, some schools are doing phonics well, but yes, their data still stinks. Why? Because kids aren't learning how to transfer those skills into text. Yeah. I'm okay with you using decodables at the lower levels. I really have no problem with it. I've really embraced that practice. However, it's still nice during shared reading to see something that's maybe above grade level for some of those kids, because maybe it's going to help with the acceleration process and also help kids achieve the standards, right?
You're absolutely right. I often reference Steve Stahl's work. He's gone now, but one of the great names in reading research, found that this is in Georgia where he lived at the time, having struggling readers, second graders, I think it was, engage in repeated readings of material that was above their reading level.
Right.
Actually, stuff that we'd call frustration level. But the fact that the kids were supported with that, given a chance to repeatedly read it, given a chance to echo read it, all that stuff, these kids made greater progress than children who were given material that was actually more at their instructional level. I think we're doing a disservice for kids when we try to, find material that's just right. We don't know what's right. What we need to do is challenge them, as you said, and then give them the support.
So I think here's the thing. You mentioned a lot before. In K and 1 and 2, when they're just learning to read, they should be able to get material that they could practice the code on, so that becomes more fluent, becomes automatic, to free them up to be able to think about prosody, expression, all the phrasing and what you're talking about to become fluent, starting that. And here's a parent, I have people who follow me. Here's a parent, Kerry Greaves, who put on my page, I've read Dr. Rasinski's letter. I have concerns about fluency. My daughter's reading specialist worked on fluency in first grade. In second grade, she told me her report card was wrong after the first trimester. She said she reads too slow. After digging, I realized she couldn't decode. They put pressure on reading fast at the expense of accuracy. I really wish they focused on decoding accuracy, automaticity. I'm going to just also jump in. And then Ashley Roberts, the author of the parent letter,
Right.
Who we also had on our show,
I watched it.
Wrote this on my LinkedIn page. I'd like to know why, after being a part of the scathing review of Lucy's program, that he signed the letter of 58. The disconnect there doesn't align despite his letter. So there are parents, what I'm trying to bring out, Tim, is there are parents who, know about fluency. It's not that they don't know the importance of fluency. Ashley, for instance, is somebody who is a parent, but who's highly trained in all of this and actually became an advocate for others. And then Kerry has been following my page for years now and knows quite a bit. So these are parents who know about fluency. I know the importance of fluency. And what you said about reading first, not having enough fluency, you're absolutely right. When I was in reading first, we tried very hard to have a fluency lab. And there was a union in one of our school districts here on Long Island that said, no, we can't have the TAs doing something instructional, which would just require them listening and doing some error correction with a kid practicing. So that was thrown out. So I do know the importance of fluency. We're well aware of it. And you're right, it wasn't given enough time. But I want to go back to the timing of fluency. I think that pushing kids to be fluent before they can actually lift the words up off the page will push them into using ineffective strategies, such as what we're talking about, saying that those are the things that shouldn't be used. What do you have to say about that? I mean, I know I mentioned a lot.
I know one of the comments that I've gotten from people has been much the same. Fluency is important, but you need to teach it once kids have some degree of command over the code. That makes some sense, but it's not true. You can begin teaching fluency as early as first grade, and dare I say even kindergarten with kids. And there's scientific evidence to support that. One in particular that I had a chance to deal with was a program that I developed with my colleague Nancy Paddock called Fast Start in Reading. Basically, it's a program in which we intended it actually for parents, but teachers use it, in which first graders, and in this particular case, this is in Columbus, Ohio, it was a dissertation study, kids most at risk, first graders, what they were given a nursery rhyme. And parents were taught, actually, this was a parent intervention, to read to, read with, listen to your child read. So Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep, large text in front of them. Parent reads it to the child follows along. Then they invite the child to read with them. And because of the brevity of the text itself, it only takes a few minutes. After about 2, 3, 4 readings, the parent asks the child, oh, you read for me now. And of course, the kid's got it memorized, of course. But then what happens is we spend the next part and we start to examine the words, in particular, the word families, the phonograms, if you will, all the EEP words, perhaps, that are there. And then the very next day or every other day, we bring in another nursery rhyme like that. What they found in this study was that, again, these are kids who have not yet, developed full command of the code. But what they found was when they compared these kids who were an alternative not an alternative intervention, they had the same instruction in school, a comparison group. The only difference was the one group of children their parents were trained to do this. The other group of children, they got the poem to take home, but they weren't told exactly what to do with it. The group with the parent support made twice the gain in fluency and word recognition.
Well, what was
in a
the
matter of
initial
3 months' time.
instruction?
I'm
What was,
sorry?
so you're saying, okay, it was compared to what the children were getting in school. What were they getting in school? Were they getting explicit systematic phonics instruction, or were they getting something that's typical of what you would see, which is more of this balance? If you're adding in something like that.
Okay, but you're getting away from my point. My point, your question was, can you be teaching fluency that early? And I'm trying to make the point is, yeah, you can. Yes, it was probably more of a traditional program. It's been several years since I've actually taken a look at the actual data on this, but what we were comparing, both groups of kids had the same instruction in school. There was no difference. The only difference was this opportunity to read with, listen to your child read to you, and then engage in some word study. So, word study is still part of that, but so was fluency. These things can be, at least in my opinion, limited opinions, can be addressed together, and they should be. We're trying to accelerate kids' progress in reading, and to say you can't do fluency until you have reached this level of proficiency with word recognition, I think we're doing a disservice to kids.
I don't think that you can expose kids to poetry and have them work with it and do some sort of analytic phonics work, which is basically what you're saying. Go back and kind of look at the whole and see the parts rather than a synthetic phonics approach. But getting back to what you said with the UK, that's not exactly so. That if they looked at some of the classrooms where it was done authentically, true to what they were designed to do, these kids were doing extremely well. I'm working with a program now, Sounds Right, and they have tons of case studies that show how well kids are doing, and they have the phonics check, and it's out of the UK. But getting back to your idea about fluency.
Is this published research?
Yes, it's a published case study book that came out with Sounds Right. You could certainly get a copy of it from the website.
Okay.
But the work is phenomenal, and the kids are thriving, writing words with vowels, not leaving out vowels and sentences, and really doing some extraordinary work. With that said, they are, following a program. They are doing it with fidelity. There's that F word again. They are following it. And I think that we have to look at, as you said, all the pieces with fluency. I think that this idea that kids should be rushed, however, to sound like readers, that's what I hear a lot of teachers saying. Oh, you want them to sound like readers. Well, of course we want them to sound like readers, but at the expense of them starting to guess words and maybe skip words and try to just sound the right way before they're ready, I think could be not the right way to go, at least as an interventionist. I'm telling you, I see lots of kids who want to sound like readers before they're ready, and they don't want to struggle through something decodable. Judy, what are your thoughts on this, since you're doing intervention as well? Just
all right. So listen, the data has been showing us that there's a problem, right? 3 decades, we have consistently not great data all across the board. Something's not working.
Wait,
Emily,
can I stop you for a second, Judy?
Yeah.
Actually, that data actually goes back more than three decades. And I'll just make the point here in defense of Lucy. Lucy's program did not come on board until, only 2 decades ago, 25 years ago. So, this problem precedes Lucy. And so making, the suggestion, as I think not Lucy, but Emily did, that this is the cause for the reading problem, I think is a bit disingenuous.
I think it was a big part of the problem, though. I have to say, I think there was a big problem. Kids did not become expert in decoding skills. And one of the problems were we as teachers weren't taught to be experts. I've been in education now for 25 years. Why did I only become an expert in how words work about 6 or 7 years ago? That's problematic. And I love decoding and all of that stuff more than probably the average person. A lot of my friends are still asking me, they said, hey, Judy, can you show it to us? Why was this not prioritized? Why?
Yeah.
And then I have some other.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
Yeah,
you're right.
I think that was problematic. I could have helped a lot more kids had I known that information as an expert as I am now.
Sure.
Now, the other thing
she says so herself.
Why not? Nobody's going to toot my horn, so I'm going to toot my own horn. So anyway, the other thing is, another point, I want to make a couple of points. So fluency definitely can start even before a kid even opens a book. Fluency can start with oral language. Yeah, babies are talking, they hear sound, that you could repeat phrases with kids. It's not going to hurt them. If a kid says, I want that toy, mom might say, oh, this is how I would say it. I want that toy.
Or they hear their mama and daddy sing to them. And
you know, oral language is a very big piece of the puzzle for me. However, I think that schools really have to start thinking a little bit more closely about having a scope and sequence of skills that kids need to be proficient readers. Agreed. Because fluency, it heavily counts on how kids decode. If you're not going to decode well, you're not going to be fluent and you're not going to understand what the hell you just read. So something has to change, something.
Well, I certainly agree with the whole idea of working on fluency. I have many kids, and you brought this up in your letter, Tim. Let me just get the numbers right, where you said out of, where is it? You said that 60-something% of the kids struggle with fluency compared to 40 some odd.
Yes, this is from the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Right. And I would say, I can't find it this second, but I would say that many of the children I work with, that's kind of the last thing to come. They could start to decode the word sound by sound, but then this idea of kicking it over into fluency and working on that specifically absolutely needs to be there. It's a big part of the picture. With that said, though, I do feel that the parent letter, the parent concerns, the emotion that goes into that clearly is telling the reading community that they want change and they're frustrated. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I see myself as an advocate for parents, and that's why I signed a letter, because I think parents who get the message that it's only about phonics are going to be disappointed with the results on that. Since you asked my thoughts, I'm wondering why in the Sold a Story, again, getting back to the question that we put in the original. We got so many letters going back and forth, but the original letter that got me in trouble that I signed said, tell the rest of the story. Was there any attempt to interview parents who are found that whether units of study or reading recovery actually worked? How come those parents weren't interviewed? How come schools, teachers, and school districts, why weren't that really have embraced that program? Why weren't they interviewed? Obviously, it's a very popular program. Why did these schools choose it if it's such a bad program? That's what I'd like to know. Nobody's shoving a knife in front of these school districts and saying you got to buy this program. Obviously, they see something in value. Now, having said that, I have my concerns. I put it in that report that you mentioned. The evaluation of units of study. But why weren't those parents, why weren't those schools, why weren't those teachers at least approached to find out what their thoughts on was? Because I've heard from many teachers, school district administrators who are very happy with units of study and very happy with how kids have achieved. In fact, there are two studies that came out in a New York Times article on units of study. One was done by the American Institute of Research. Another one was done at Georgia State University, looking at schools, comparing schools that used units of study versus schools that didn't. And what they found was that in both cases, there were certain instances in which units of study, actually, the children actually outperformed kids who were in the business as usual approach or the more traditional approach. Again, why if we're talking about science of reading, why weren't these studies part of that report?
So, you mentioned.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So,
Am I in trouble?
you mentioned about asking teachers and parents about their thoughts about what typically goes on in school.
Mhm.
I would say those parents are probably the parents of typical readers.
Sure.
And if you don't have a child who struggles, everything is fine and dandy. You could do anything you want, and those kids would be just fine. That, I think, is true with teachers who are teaching in a mainstream classroom.
Mhm.
It's actually a lot more fun to teach with books that are, you could just have these fun conversations and literacy circles. And certainly when teachers are happy, administrators are happy, and the publishers are happy. And if you're asking why perhaps this has gone on for as long as it had, for years, I would probably say to you, because most people find it, fun and okay, and there's really not much accountability. It's always fun when you're not really accountable, having to show on a scope and sequence exact skills that are taught.
Mhm.
Having done both, because I was that balanced literacy teacher.
Mhm.
And I could tell you that it certainly was a lot more fun to pull out something that, where kids could just kind of chant along and say all this without really getting into the nitty-gritty of lifting the sounds off the page. It's a lot harder. Judy, your thoughts?
All right. So yes, I, like Faith, had a history in balanced literacy and now in the science of reading. There is no way possible to say that everything I did before needs to go in the garbage. There were a lot of practices that clearly aligned with the science of reading, which I spoke about on previous episodes, like the Elkonin boxes, the spelling boxes, the repeating of phrases, looking at words. Could I have been better? 1,000%. Is looking at the initial letter of a word enough? No. Was looking at pictures the best course of action? It's not. Do I still see that happening in classrooms now? Yes. Do I see kids frustrated that their teacher is telling them not to sound out words?
Mhm.
So those things were problematic. And if Reading Recovery wants to make a miraculous comeback, they're going to have to think about what they're doing, how closely they can align it with the science, because you know what? One-on-one instruction, it's very expensive, but some kids need more attention. And, to just say that everything from the past was garbage is just not true.
Mhm.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
Interactive writing was part of it. Phonics was even part of it, but we should also have a 30-minute phonics block. We should have a very well-designed literacy block that accounts
Mhm.
for, I'm going to say the word that Wexler's tired of. I'm not tired of it. 5 pillars of
Yeah.
literacy and writing. And you know what I'm going to add? Knowledge building.
Yeah.
Knowledge building. These are all key components. And I think that the really important thing for me that I think the whole world has to hear right now is that we all want the same thing for kids, no matter
Sure.
what side you're on, but we all cannot be afraid of shifting when needed. You can't be that attached to things that you did in the past if they're not beneficial for students. So, it's time to line up.
You're
We
right.
gotta let go of some things. We have to let go. And you know what? A couple of years ago, maybe like 10 years ago, I was obsessed with running records. I thought that was the only thing to do Was it valuable listening to kids read? Yes. Now I'm doing the oral reading fluency, which is more aligned with the science and Acadians. But guess what? When kids are reading, a lot of those kids are still struggling because yes, maybe they have some phonics going on in their class, but what the hell is going on during the rest of that literacy block that the kid only read 3 words per minute?
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you. I think all of us have done things in the past that probably we could have done better, and hopefully we're all moving forward. And I mean, isn't that the goal? We know we're human beings. We make mistakes, but the goal is to keep moving forward and trying to help kids. You mentioned reading recovery, and Judy, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of Emily Hanford's one of the programs, or was it a blog or one of the episodes of Sold the Story focused on reading recovery?
Yeah.
Now, first of all, I got myself in trouble with reading recovery back when it first was introduced back in the late 80s. They did a research study reported in Reading Research Quarterly, and I wrote a critique of it. I didn't think it was I thought there were some very big problems. I'm always writing these letters to get me into trouble. That was 30 years ago. Having said that,
Signing letters.
and
What
I
did you
think
say?
I said, and the signing letters, there's another one here.
I'm done with it. I'm done with it. No more. So, do I like reading recovery? I'm a bit ambivalent about it. I think there's good things about it. And I'm concerned about that study that was done that showed that kids, by the time they're in grades 3 and 4, don't seem to maintain whatever gains they had to begin with. But if you look closely at this study, there were some problems with it. Number one, and the author actually mentioned this, they were following kids and they were only able to identify, what was it, 15 to 25% of the kids? Where's the other 75% of the kids that participated in this? Leaving out a whole bunch, could really skew the results of that. And the author actually said, he said, based upon, if you're looking for first grade reading achievement, reading recovery is probably the best thing out there. So, there's some evidence. In fact, there was a meta-analysis of 36 different studies on reading recovery, and they all found positive results. So despite the fact that I might be somewhat ambivalent about it, I think, we have to take a closer look at it, but let's not say it's we should throw it out. I think it could be improved.
It has to be changed if it's going to even stay relevant. And there's better interventions, Tim, that are out there for kids that are more explicit, more structured. Maybe you could see actually more kids than just one kid at a time. That's not the most cost efficient.
Yeah, right.
And it has to shift, honestly.
And I've had kids who have gone through reading recovery and they were not recovered. These are kids who finished the program, and then in 2nd and 3rd grade, their mothers were calling me up for intervention.
That's true.
And that they wasted all that time, money. And there were a lot of them. It's not just 1 or 2. Lots of kids.
I would say let's give reading recovery the benefit of the doubt, and let's see what they have to say. What do they come up with? Is there another study along the way? I would not call this study that was done by May to be a definitive study. It's suggestive, but we're in science of reading. Science requires, a variety of proofs before we can actually accept it. For reading recovery, you have to admit that the idea of identifying kids early, intervening early, is something instead of waiting for them to fail, is a humongous achievement that we did not do before. So, yes, nothing's perfect.
Nothing is perfect for sure. So I could actually speak from experience because I was that person in the field. And I think I'm a pretty strong educator at this point in my life. I didn't have every student discontinue. I had maybe 50% did, but 50% didn't. And a lot of those students were ENL speakers, and they couldn't just look at that first letter to decode a word. If that program even remains in any shape or form, those teachers better be experts at teaching kids how to decode. Those students need the proper book in their hands that are going to be systematic and explicit And the one positive thing, however, I'm going to find the positive because I always do find positive, was that reading behaviors, and I know I talked with Faith about this on a couple of episodes, reading behaviors were things that we showed kids how to problem solve at point of difficulty. Now, I haven't seen any other program out there that actually explicitly says, okay, you're going to take your finger and you're going to slide through the word. You know what I mean? Or say, and showing how your brain thinks out loud to problem solve. I think that was
you don't
really,
need to problem solve a word if you can decode it.
well, part
And
of
you're
it,
taught how to really say the sounds and read the word. You shouldn't.
you have to model that as a practitioner.
I think even that language.
To me, it resonates with me. I really
Not
feel,
with me.
but
Not
a kid is not born knowing how to touch a word. You have to model it. You have to model through the letters.
Yes,
I might
taking
have
a finger is fine. Anyhow, Tim.
But can I
You're
throw
the
in something
guest.
here? Can I throw in something right here? I absolutely agree phonics has to be taught. But when I tell my students in my phonics class in Ohio, if you're a teacher, you have to take a course in phonics. And if you're at Kent State University, you're likely to take it from me. And one of the first things I tell students is this: the goal of phonics instruction is to get kids not to use phonics. You and I
Correct.
hardly
That's
ever
right.
use phonics. How do we get that way? Teaching decoding, but then crossing that fluency bridge so that all those words are
100%.
read automatically.
100%. So here's a
Yeah.
question for you, Tim. You said that fluency is not hot. I love that. It's not a hot topic.
Yeah.
So just
Actually-
say, yeah, why isn't it hot, Tim?
I don't know. What you're referring to is the International Literacy Association did surveys of people around the world on hot topics. And for like 8-9 years in a row, when they said, tell me about fluency, they said, oh, that's not hot. I think there's a number of reasons why it's not hot. Number one is usually we associate fluency with oral reading. And indeed, yeah, you're listening to kids read prosodically. And, you know, our goal in reading instruction is actually get kids to be proficient in silent reading. So that's one of the things. Another one is we often think of it as associated only with younger readers, but what we find is that, well, we have high school kids, college kids, who struggle with reading fluency. We did a study where we could predict among college freshmen their ACT scores based upon 1 minute of reading, the Acadians type scores that you were talking about, Judy. And of course, the misinterpretation, I think you referred to it earlier about reading fast. Oh, fluency is just getting kids to read fast. No, it's getting kids to read automatically and with expression that reflects the meaning of the text itself.
Exactly.
And so when teachers hear this, or parents for that matter, oh yeah, it's not about oral. I'm not worried about oral reading. It's only for younger kids. Oh, it's only for getting kids read faster. You know, then yeah, of course it's not a hot topic. So actually, I got a little pissed off about that. Oh, sorry about the language there, but
It's okay. Oh, you can say anything.
We
Let
love
it
it.
fly.
fluency is the new F word, Faith.
there you go.
Press your
I
BS button
noticed.
to make Tim feel comfortable. Press that
Hold on,
BS
hold
button.
on.
There you go. But I actually wrote an article several years ago, and it was entitled "Why Reading Fluency Should Be Hot." In fact, if anybody's interested in that, it's on my website, timrasinski.com. I guess if you wouldn't mind putting that in the notes as well. I have many of the articles I've written over the years there, and they're downloadable, free. Anybody might like to have them, including, I might add, word ladders. I was hoping maybe we could get into that.
That's in my notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you last time, Judy, when you were talking to Ashley, mention that, and it warmed my heart when you mentioned reading
Can I
the
mention
word
something
ladders.
about that?
I'm sorry?
Can I mention something about that? I don't know if you remember this, but during the pandemic, I was stuck at home with the whole family. We all couldn't look at each other. We were getting on each other's nerves from being home together for so long. And one of the things that we did every night at the table was we played with your word ladders as a family. We didn't even write anything. We were just mentally thinking, okay, delete this, add this,
Yeah, yeah.
take
Well,
this.
tell people what that means, Judy,
Oh.
because
I'll leave that to Tim. He'll tell.
All right. Well,
But
a
the
word
way
ladder,
that-
there's other names for it.
One more thing, Tim.
Okay.
One more thing, Tim. So Tim is the most down-to-earth, kind person. I looked at his website. I saw her phone number. I wanted to talk more about it. Tim doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. You just talk to me like a regular, down-to-earth, kind person. Thank
Here's
you.
the thing, Judy, I have so much appreciation for what you and Faith do. You guys are in the trenches, and it's, I like to think that I work with kids, but it's not the same as your college professor. But I have so much respect for teachers who are trying every day, and parents as well. And so when somebody writes to me, I say, if you write to me, I'll write back on email. So thanks for saying that. Now, what's a word ladder? Basically, it's a word chain. Some people call them work of Bruce McCandless, Isabel Beck, and others, really found it to be a powerful way of building phonemic awareness, word decoding, and comprehension. Basically, it's a little, you go through one word to the next, and you add a letter, you change a letter. And so, you got, here's one I'm thinking of the top of my head. We'll start with the word cat. Change a letter in cat to make something you sleep on when you go camping. That would be a what?
Matt.
No. Change the bottle.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Wait, say it again.
Okay, we're messing
I
this
need
up
a
already.
more. Okay.
A cot, C-O-T, cot. Okay.
Oh, okay. Good.
Okay, now I gotta be more specific here. Change the first letter in cot to make oh golly, these are sometimes found on clothing. It would be a polka
Dot.
Okay.
Thank God.
I'm just making this up off my head here. Okay, so we went from cat to cot to dot, and here's the last one. Change the last letter in dot to make a pet that cats don't like.
Go, Faith. Faith.
Dot to
Dog.
cats don't like what?
Dog.
Dog.
Dog. Okay, cat's a dog.
But
So that's it. It's a game basically. And what happens, and what I try to do is make the first and last words go together. What we find though is really a great way of getting kids into what Linnea Airy and others have called orthographic napping. You have to examine the word. When I say go from cat to cot, where's the sound change? Beginning, middle, or end?
That's right.
And what sound is it? And of course, we're talking about meaning as well. So it's that sort of approach. And the work of Bruce McCandless, the well-known researcher, found that it was really quite remarkable in the gains that young, struggling readers, the progress that they made by doing this on a regular basis compared with an alternative intervention group there. So that's a word ladder. Now, one of the reasons why I mentioned that is ever since the pandemic started 2.5 years ago, I've been trying to think, well, now what can I do to help teachers and parents out in the field? So every Wednesday I post one. I call it Word Ladder Wednesday. For those of you who didn't, you're going to be making this public on Friday, January 6th, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Well, if you go to twitter.com and go to Tim Rasinski at Tim Rasinski1, my word ladder for today was Happy New Year. So we go from happy, and then the word new shows up, and then we keep going, and the last word is year. So Happy New Year 2023 from me.
That's awesome. And it also helps with vocabulary, of course, as well.
Yeah, it does. And here's the other thing I often point out when I talk with teachers. If you guys ever do Wordle or Words with Friends or Scrabble, any of these various word games that we play, if you do them regularly, you get better at it. I'm really good at Wordle now. When I first started, I couldn't get them at all half the time. But we have a special name for it when you get better at something. It's called learning. And what kind of learning? What isn't there? The best kind of learning is learning that's fun and engaging and authentic. This is what I call the art of teaching.
Yeah.
The science of teaching reading says teach phonics, teach vocabulary. The art of teaching says find ways that are engaging and authentic and creative. And I think the word ladders is just one of those many ways that creative teachers can do.
I mean, I would certainly agree with you. And these types of chains happen all the time in phonics instruction, changing a sound and then creating a new word. And that works on phonemic awareness as well. So there are a lot of benefits to that.
Absolutely.
I have another question for you. Someone posted another letter you signed.
I saw that this morning on the Twitter.
Yes. And, they wanted to know about your position on dyslexia.
Yeah.
That was the focus of the PBS report.
Right.
And, I acknowledge the letter. I have it here.
Mhm.
And going through the letter, it basically says here in the letter, and again, I don't know if these are your words, but you signed it. I don't
Yeah,
say
right.
that you wrote it, but it said that our concern is that the news hour received inadequate and incomplete scientific advice when producing the segment on dyslexia. The result perpetuates inaccuracies, misconceptions, and distortions related to reading, how it is taught, and the complexity of reading difficulties. It suggests erroneously that there is scientific certainty about dyslexia and how it should be addressed instructionally. In fact, the research evidence is equivocal, and there is much room for debate about whether dyslexia is an identifiable condition, whether it can be reliably diagnosed, and whether there are instructional approaches that are uniquely effective in ameliorating it. So, in looking at this, it seems as though this PBS show was talking about dyslexia, the children who are affected by it, and they were focused on phonics as a way to instructionally change that.
Right.
Do you object to that? I mean, you signed this letter. It seems as though you don't agree.
Well, let me respond. First of all, this is actually one I do regret to some extent, because what happened was the people who actually wrote it, when you have 50 some people writing, signing it, not everybody has a hand in writing it. One of the things they said was that there is ambivalence that's reflected in the American Psychiatric Association's definition of dyslexia, and that Steve Dykstra brought it to our attention that that's not true. The American Psychiatric Association does identify dyslexia. So that was a big regret of mine. I think dyslexia exists. I prefer to call it a profound reading difficulty. Because how do you treat kids with dyslexia versus kids who are not dyslexic? You go and you find where their difficulty is and you try to remediate it. And I think calling kids dyslexic may burden them with a label that it may be deleterious to them. My objection comes in that letter that says it is an incomplete scientific evidence and advice. And again, I go right back, here's my 40 years of reading fluency. Fluency wasn't identified. We work in our reading clinic with kids who are identified as dyslexic. And we work on fluency with these kids and we find remarkable progress. And so when they come up with this program that says, it's an issue of phonics, I've got to object to it. It's got to be more than that. That's all ever since 1955, when Rudolph Flesch wrote that book, Why Johnny Can't Read, we've been on this phonics only kick. And yeah, I agree with it, but I have to, share my opinion that it's not all there is to it. I do agree that dyslexia exists. Kids have profound difficulties learning to read, and we need to address them. And phonics is one way, but it's not the only way.
But wouldn't you say that accuracy first is probably the place to start, and that fluency is something absolutely we need to work on? But if they're inaccurate and reading and sounding like a reader, they're still making errors all over the place, which could impact their comprehension. Right? I mean, there are kids.
Like I mentioned to you earlier, that we work on fluency with first graders, and we get great results that have been published in scientific journals.
And are they accurate to the point of, let's say, 93 to 97% accurate in what they're reading? Well, then it's not an accuracy issue. And
no. The fluency instruction, along with phonics at the same time, leads to improvements that gets them up to 97, 98% accuracy. I would not do phonics. I would not do fluency without phonics. I think they go together.
I would agree. I think they go together. But I think that you can't really, especially with a child with profound difficulties. These are the kids I see. These are the kids I work with. And I could tell you that if you push them into reading things where they don't have most of the code accessible to them, they're just going to start guessing and making up words that fit, that might be a meaningful, as we would say, miscue, even though we know that that type of assessment doesn't really have a lot of validity. But
so you would take a child away from that kind of text?
I would, no, I didn't say that. I would say while I'm working in intervention with them, I want most of the words to be decodable, but that doesn't mean you don't expose them to other types of books and read alouds and sharing other types of books. But to expect them to read, a kid who has profound dyslexia to read, they're going to go right back to cueing. They're going to grab a picture. They're going to grab from somewhere to try to catch the meaning. And their eyes are going to move away from the word because that's what's comfortable for them, to read around the word.
Let me offer what I would do. Yeah. If I had a student like that, I'm assuming that the text is not overly long. If you're working with a kid who's got dyslexia, you want to keep it relatively short. Here's what I would do, and this is exactly what Carol Chomsky did in her article called After Decoding, Then What? I would give the child support. I would read the text to them, have them follow along with me. And I might even read it to them a couple of times, pointing to the words as we go through. Then invite the child to join me. And then perhaps do an echo read to the point where the kid can actually read it. And then I would engage in some intensive phonics instruction with that particular child. So again, we're doing both the phonics and the fluency. And our own experience has been that it seems to work pretty well with kids. Number one, these kids can read something. They have that sense of success. Many children, dyslexics especially, they go from one day to the next, and they never have that sense of success of being able to read something that other children do. In fact, I'd like to tell you a story of a child who came to our reading clinic years ago. His name is Tyler. We run a summer reading clinic, goes about 6 weeks. He comes in, he's a second grader, and he's a non-reader. And I still remember the first day, this is in June, you could tell he did not want to be there. He was in tears, holding on to his mom. Oh God, more reading instruction. He hated reading. But one of the things we do in our reading clinic is we want kids to feel successful every single day. How can you be successful at reading? We bring in poetry, not terribly long, maybe a song lyric. I love the Alan Katz. Do you know those? Alan Katz's work, the silly songs. Anyways, we go through that process that I just described to you, where the kids, we read it to them, we read it chorally, they practice on their own. Eventually they get to the point where they can read it. We do some word study. And then eventually that child gets out and perform. We have a mom or dad sitting out in the hallway, and the kids go out and they perform for their parent. And of course, they get a lot of kudos for their great work. And they do this every single day. Well, come the end of the reading clinic, actually what happens is the kids start writing their own poetry. And I still remember this one by Taylor. He did the Diddle Diddle Dumpling, My Son John poem. He wrote his own version of it. Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred slept all day on his bed. Woke up at midnight, screamed, "There's a monster under my bed." Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred. It's a simple poem, but he could write it, and something he could never do. We actually took the kids' poems that they write, we put them into a book form, and the kids leave with a book of poetry that they contributed to. But what happened was, we at the last day of the reading clinic, we have this big celebration where the kids perform for their moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, and Taylor performed that poem. And afterwards, we have little punch and cookies, and he comes up to me and he tugs on my sleeve and he says, "Mr. Rasinski, can we keep doing Camp Read a Lot?" That's what we call it. This was a kid who 6 weeks earlier wanted nothing to do with reading, but now 6 weeks later says, "This is fun. I'm successful at it, and I'm learning to read." That's what we want for all our kids. And you guys describe some great stuff. I see a lot of value in what you're doing. But I would hope that, whoever's listening to this podcast can see that there's value in reading fluency as well. That can make a
100%.
difference for so many kids.
I think it's, definitely an important piece of,
Mhm.
The whole, as Judy would say, the literacy block. It's important to include fluency. I don't think it's stressed enough. So last thoughts, let's just wrap this up at this point. So, Tim, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to say?
Well, I do, and I'm actually going to invoke my colleague, Jan Hasbrook. Many of you know her.
Mhm.
She's a scholar who's written a book on dyslexia. She's also a fluency expert. Many of you out there might use the Hasbrook and Tyndall fluency norms that I use. I think they're really good. Anyway, she wrote this a couple years ago, and I think it really hits home. And this is what she wrote about fluency. She said, if readers do not develop adequate levels of fluency, they become stuck in the middle of the bridge, able to decode words, but with insufficient automaticity to adequately facilitate comprehension or enjoy the process of reading. These students become our reluctant readers, often with dire consequences for themselves, their future families, and society as a whole. I couldn't say it any better than that. We need good decoders, but we need to take them across that bridge.
100%.
And I think so many kids get left in the middle of that bridge. So
Yes.
thanks,
Judy?
Jan.
All right. So for me, first of all, thank you, Tim, for being our guest, for being here with us, for, just sharing your knowledge. I'm very honored.
Well, thanks for being so kind to me.
Thank you. So I think that it's important for us all in education to follow the science. There's brain scans going on and serious stuff that I don't get to see the brain scans as a practitioner in the field, but there is science coming out. We have to follow it. Things from the past we might need to let go of. Another takeaway, be careful what you sign, including myself. Another piece, we speak a lot about phonics, but we know a lot of dyslexics really, really struggle with the phonemic awareness piece. That's a real sign of where we should be looking at too. Let's not forget that phonemic awareness piece. Number 4, what do we need to keep and what do we let go of? Because I'm still a little bit unclear on what the excellent literacy block should look like. Repeated readings, no repeated readings. It's a lot of information going around. We need to start having solution-based discussions. And lastly, things like reader's theater didn't come up. One of my favorite things to help kids with phrasing and fluency is reader's theater. That's it.
I agree completely.
So I also would like to thank you, Tim, for being with us. As I said before we even started recording, I followed you for years. I was part of Reading First, and your name was synonymous with all the people who are leading the charge. So it's an honor to be speaking with you. It was a pleasure. And I guess my last thoughts are your last thoughts, that fluency is a very important piece of the puzzle. If you don't mind me saying so, I wish you had written that letter, maybe not as a response to everything else, but maybe if it would have come sooner, your position, I think it would have been heard in a different way, because I think your message is so important. And I think it was probably a bit tarnished by all the other signatures and the whole scope of that letter. If you don't mind me saying so, I think perhaps, even though you don't think it was a mistake, I don't think it was probably the best idea to sign that letter, letter of 58. But I will say that your work, your body of work, I certainly respect. I love the work on fluency, and I want to get that message across to people. So thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to say I'm glad I signed it. I wish they may have changed the language, but again, we need to be kind to each other.
Yes, yes.
And it wasn't only that letter, but there were other letters that came through, the parent letter that could have been better as well. So let's just be clear on that, a balanced approach, if you will.
No, All right, let's
All
end
right.
this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
It's
Thank
been
you.
great.
Follow us on
appreciate it.
Facebook, the Literacy View.
I do.
Follow us.
I do.
Where else could they follow us? Our viewers. Facebook group, YouTube Literacy View, Instagram, Twitter.
Yes. All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Happy New Year.